Always working on empty. Is that the kind of way to face the burning heat? Just think about my baby. I'm so full of love I can barely eat.
And welcome to Dregs of Wisdom with Andrew Tanner.
Hey everyone, we are here with Dregs of Wisdom, episode 15. I have a special guest for you today, my friend and colleague for many years, Matt Giordano, who is a yoga teacher for nearly 20 years. He's a master of body mechanics and really becoming a teacher's teacher since 2016 through the founding of his school, Chromatic Yoga. He integrates his background in Aikido and Taekwondo with his expertise in Vinyasa Yoga, as well as body mechanics, body alignment. And Matt has been really all around the block. We first met in the New York City yoga scene in the early 2000s, but he's been featured on the Martha Stewart Whole Living magazine, Yoga Journal. He's been on Live with Kelly and Michael Strahan. He's become one of the most sought after yoga festival teachers, teaching at Wanderlust, the Yoga Games, YOLO Festival in Korea, a host of European festivals, and our very own upcoming Berkshire Yoga Festival. I think personally what makes Matt special is the energy and humility that he brings to the mat, not just in kind of telling people how to get aligned, which he is truly a master of, but more so helping people feel in their own body like, oh, that's what it feels like to be aligned. And I think that's what makes a teacher special. It's not just telling them what to do, it's helping students discover it on their own. Matt and I have a lot in common. We're both 40. We both grew up in the East Coast and played hockey. And then later dropped that for yoga. So we both found ourselves in the yoga scene in the NYC in the early 2000s. So I'm really interested to see where this is going to go. Matt, we have a lot to cover today, but I wanted to start with this. First, very important question. Who, in your opinion, is the greatest Hartford whaler of all time, not including Gordie Howe?
Wow, that's an incredible question. See, I'm not familiar with the Hartford Whalers, but I imagine they must be, they're part of the Rangers organization. Is that correct?
No, dude. I thought did you grow up in Connecticut?
No, I grew up in Long Island. So
that's why. Damn it. We screwed up. Well, we did stump you. I thought you grew up in Connecticut.
Although
so I had
it would be Gordie Howe, though. I mean, that would be the one.
The only other acceptable answer is Ron Francis. The Hartford Whalers were a terrible team. They literally only won one playoff game in their entire existence. And I know you live in Connecticut now, so that's why I made the mistake. Oh, so were you an Islanders or a Rangers fan?
I'm an Islanders fan.
Okay. Who's your favorite Islander?
Currently am Islanders fan. Who's my favorite? I'm a big fan of Brock Nelson. He's an underrated player, and I think he's incredible.
Awesome. I was a hockey goalie growing up, so my favorite players were Andy Moog and Reggie Lemlin, who were the goalies for the Bruins in the 80s and early 90s. Okay, for real, welcome to the show. We always try to stump people with the first question. We did sort of get you, but I feel like I cheated. You said in your bio that authenticity is the highest core value in your yoga teaching. What do you think, what does that mean to you? And what does that how does that make itself present for you right now as a yoga teacher?
Yeah, I think the reason why I feel that is such a core value and why it's so important, not just as a teacher, but just in life, because I think what that word authenticity really means is to pare back or pull back anything that is not who we are. So it's about just simply tapping into the essence of our being, whether as a human being, of course, and allowing ourselves to be seen, heard, understood as we are without trying to cater to anybody else's, viewpoint. And at the same time, I don't mean lacking compassion or lacking, what's the word exactly? Let's just say the ability to see someone else's point of view. So It's not about trying to push yourself in anybody else's face, but it's just about letting yourself be who you are. And why that's important as a teacher, I think, because it allows you to attract the correct students for you, rather than creating a veil of, an image or a character that other people are assuming you are. So it's letting people see the truth and then making a choice for themselves that you are either their teacher or not their teacher in that moment. And I think that's also true as friends and partners. I think as we go through life, I'm married now, but I think growing up, there's part of me that always tried to be who that person wanted me to be. And I think in my partners, they tried to also be who I wanted them to be, some level of that, and friendships and things like this. And so you kind of get to a point where you're like, oh, this is not the person I thought they were, and that happens quite often in all different types of dynamics and relationships. So I think authenticity is the courage to be who you are at the time that you are, meaning you're always changing. So allowing yourself to change as well. And I think a big challenge for a lot of yoga teachers is as they step into the practice or the practice of self-inquiry, they start to change, and their family and their friends all have a perspective of who they are. And it's hard for them to shift in the presence of their friends and family, or the ones that are close to them.
All right, Matt. So I wanted to ask you about authenticity. You talk about that on your website and as one of your core values as a yoga teacher. And honestly, it's become so rote that people talk about authenticity all the time. And I see one of the issues for yoga teachers is a lot of times when they become a professional teacher, they're trying to present themselves in a way that's bigger than they are, or that's more than they are. Or there's just a lot of feeling with social media and stuff that you have to put an image of yourself out into the world. How do you teach the concept of authenticity to your yoga teachers that you train? And, how do you see authenticity operating in the world today?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I let's say that probably most people are trying to fit into an image that they think is going to be attractive, meaning when I say the word attractive, meaning attracting people, not necessarily visually attractive like that way. Yeah. But I think we will act or try to be a certain way, take photos a certain way, teach a certain way, sound a certain way, because we assume that's what people want. And maybe because it works for somebody else to be that way. But when it's somebody else, it's usually, if they're attracting a lot of people or the right audience for them, it's because that's their authentic expression. So why I say authenticity and how you can step into that authenticity for me is allowing yourself to be truthful with the people that you are around, regardless if you're in the role as a yoga teacher, or you're in the role as a yoga student, or you're in the role of mom, dad, child, whatever role you're playing in that current moment, allowing yourself to be or share yourself truthfully. Now, why that's important is because what really attracts a student into a practice or to a certain teacher, or it is the connection point where someone feels that there is something more between you and them, meaning you have some bit of knowledge, or you have a way of sharing that knowledge, or you have a perspective on life or a perspective on yoga, right? There's always something that's like, oh, that person has something that feels like a magnet for me. Now, if the magnet that you're creating is false, then no one can be attracted to that. Now, it works for a little while, right? There's a little bit of there's always a way that some of that fakeness or falseness, that facade that we create, does attract a certain amount of people. So that unfortunately leads us down a road thinking that we need to keep going that way. But the reality is, if you really want to take this on a much deeper, more profound level as a teacher, as a friend of friends, or whatever it might be, the authenticity is like a magnet. So it's going to create a connection point that other people can see how they fit into your presence. And so what that means is, if I'm being myself, courageously being who I am, and I'm allowing myself to be vulnerable in the presence of others, I'm allowing myself to share my flaws as well as my strengths, then other people can see how their flaws and their strengths fit with mine. But if there's like a false facade, if there's a kind of an image that's put in front of who I am, then we have to work harder to kind of like get through that in order to connect to each other. And when I say this, I just want to be clear. When I say like the attraction from student to teacher, what I mean is there's a pull that creates a desire to learn or to be in that teacher's presence more. I don't mean anything.
It's not just because you're just the super sexy man over here.
Right. I just want to make sure that I'm not communicating some strange message, right?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. You said in your bio that one of the kind of guiding principles for you is this philosophy of I can and how. And I'm curious, this relates to the authenticity. How do you help a student who doesn't have the I can in them? They have the I can't. Maybe they therefore also have the I can't be authentic. I can't be myself. I'm too afraid. How do you help someone like that? And have you experienced working with people like that, or gone through that yourself?
Great question. I love that. Okay. So the question this came up from a teacher of mine in high school, and I'm glad I learned it at that early age. And she always, my teacher, Miss Walk, would always say, she was my art teacher, and I and all of us students would always say, I can't do that. We'd see the impossible and we couldn't do it in our minds. And she said, the answer is not can you, can't you, it's how do you? So essentially, yes, you can, but how? So she would always force us to reframe the question, like, how do I do that? And then she could step in and support us. But with the I can't, she couldn't step in and support us, right?
So she literally taught your inner child was taught, hey, you're not allowed to say I can't. Instead, you have to, we're going to say it again as how.
Yeah.
And you were actually like practiced that in school, in what, high school or?
Yep. In high school, starting from 9th grade, I started with her then. And because of teachings like that, I stuck with her for all 4 years. And I just took every art class possible because she really taught me that. But what she was teaching us as students was to empower her as a teacher, right? We were stepping into the role by saying how. We are deciding to be the student. Right. And she gets to now step in the empowered role of being the teacher, which is such a that little distinction is so important, because most of us, especially if we're yoga teachers, feel like we have to know the answer to everything, which disempowers the potential for someone to be our teacher. And it's vice versa also. If you don't enable or encourage people that you're around to pull things out of you so you can be the teacher, that dynamic then gets destroyed. I think I'm going a little off topic, but I think it's really important to allow the dynamic of student teacher to take place, and not to discourage a teacher from being in the role of power, and not to discourage a student from being in the role of learning, of student, right? So like there's two sides of this. Of course, we're talking about just student teacher, but when it comes to empowering, if I'm in the role of teacher and I'm trying to support someone to empower them to be a more authentic teacher in their practice of teaching. It's a mouthful.
Teacher, yeah, we got it.
Yep. So I would encourage them first to, do the introspective work that is going to look for, where things start, as far as why they feel they can't share themselves, and this is, I guess, a bit deep. Okay. So you might, I guess from a responsibility factor, I should say maybe best to be done in the presence of a therapist or trained professional that can provide you with the right tools to go into your childhood and ask yourself those questions. Because really, the reality is most of us didn't develop this fear as an adult. We developed it as a child, and we carried it through our adult life, that we can't simply be who we are because we were rejected at some age by friends, loved ones, whatever it might be. And then we adapted this falsehood that says, well, I can't be who I am, so I have to be kind of what people want me to be. And so then we continue down that path, and then we apply it to teaching yoga, and it becomes a bit of a challenge, and let's say it puts a wall up between our potential students and our potential as a teacher. So
do you think, and you mentioned like doing therapy. I don't know whether that's something that I just had a great talk with Todd Norian recently, and he has done a lot. He's worked with therapists. He's done all sorts of things. He teaches on the yoga of emotion. I wonder if you've seen people that, like I've seen people that do therapy their whole life. They don't make a change. Sometimes it's great. Sometimes it isn't. I think there's a mixed bag, and I'm not going to tell anyone not to do therapy. But have you seen people just in your own, through being in a teacher training with you, or through having access to someone who's thinking differently, start to make those changes in themselves?
Yeah, 100%.
Or do you think, so do you believe that we have to go back to our past, or can we fix it in the present?
Well, okay. It can't be fixed in the past. It only can be fixed in the present. However, going back to the past, I believe, can help give power to your actions in the present. Because if our actions are always based on our past experience, right? So all of our choices are made based on our past experience. Now, if you don't understand your past experience and why you are choosing, or why you have this perspective on life, then of course your past is always going to be ruling your current actions. So yes, in the moment and in the present is where change can occur, and only can occur. But if your actions are always based on subconscious past collective experiences that you don't understand, then likely you're always going to be taking the same actions, even though you're wanting change, but you're taking the same path because it's a reaction, right? So when you understand intellectually why your subconscious, or why part of you is believing a certain thing or behaving a certain way, and you can start to see like, oh, I'm acting this way because X, Y, and Z, then you could say, I can choose a different path. And you can recognize it's not really you that believes that or has that perspective. It's just this collection of experiences that is creating this current falsehood of me, myself, and I. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess my thought though is, do you think students have to intellectually go back and understand what happened? Or do you think through the practice of yoga, through the work they're doing in their body that's in this moment, that they could spontaneously heal that, and then later realize like, oh wow, that thing's not bothering me anymore? Or do you feel that you have to go back and understand the story intellectually and then rewrite it? If this isn't
this is fine.
Want to go,
I love this. It's just, I would say that me saying, theoretically speaking, yes, I think you can heal in the now, like, and not ever go into your past. But that would be theory. My experience, my experience is not based on, what I realized is through practice. Most of my healing happened through my meditation teacher, Rudrani, and she's also a counselor. And so I got a lot from her. And I'd say the tools she gave me were that I can be here in this moment and I can choose my actions. And at the same time, all of my current belief systems and mind frameworks are based on past. And so if I understand that, then it's going to be quick. I'm going to be quicker, and it's easier for me to see when I'm reacting. Right. But there was probably 5-6 years of practicing being present and making choices without actually reflecting on past experiences. But there was a stopping point where like I couldn't progress any further. And that's where until I went further back. And I was getting frustrated. Like I just couldn't get far enough ahead. And I realized there's some still blocks. And this is kind of like when I got into my current relationship, which is my wife, Rebecca. There were some things in the beginning that I was like, I don't know why I act that way. And I've done all this meditation. I've done all this inner work to try to be more present. Why does that feeling still keep coming up? And that's when for the sake of our relationship and for the sake of my happiness, I had to go further back. Then
so in therapy, do you mind sharing a little bit? And if don't feel like you have to get, but I'd love to hear that if you're willing to share this story. What did you discover, and what kind of therapy did you, and what was the problem that kept coming up, and what was the story behind it?
Yeah. So the problem that kept coming up, specifically in my relationship was that, it's going to sound probably nothing to the listener that doesn't know the scenario, but so my wife and I both travel a lot for work. Right. And we've always had that dynamic since the beginning of our relationship. She was on tour constantly. And when she was not on tour, I was on tour. It was this constant, travel scenario. And I'm really good at being alone. I thrive by myself. Right. And at the same time, there's a part of me that really yearns and wants and loves companionship, somebody to be, my friend, my partner, go through life, celebrate, the wins and, have somebody to complain to and have the challenges. Right. So I was always seeking a partner and at the same time thriving alone. And so whenever my wife at the time, girlfriend would leave, at first it was like, where are you going? I don't want her to leave. And then I would settle in. She would be gone for 3 months. I would settle into just being, content by myself and could do what I want when I want, all that kind of stuff, And then when she would come home, the weeks leading up, I would be really excited for her to come home. And then when she would actually come home, it would be like, I would be like, hi, and just continue doing what I was doing. And there was and for her, that was like, aren't you excited to see me? Like, isn't it, aren't you happy that I'm home? Like you wanted me to come home. You didn't want me to leave. Now I'm home and you're not really interested,
It's so funny. Yeah. I think that's actually a very common dynamic, even for people that are gone for like 2 days, right. There's this, okay, please continue. I think many will relate to this story is what I'm trying to say.
Well, yeah, maybe, I hope so. I hope some people, I also hope not, but,
so she comes home and you're like distant. There's kind of a wall, even though you thought you wanted her to be there, but then she gets there and you're kind of, there's like a part of you that's standoffish or something. That's
I still want to be doing what I'm doing. Don't want to let anybody else into cause I'm fine as it is, Mm-hmm. And okay. So essentially it seems like a small problem. Just get excited for her being home, right? It just seems like, why don't you just change your actions? Like, why don't you just snap out of it, be present, like you're happy. But it's like, it's not that easy because the experience isn't, I'm just like, there and I'm not feeling the emotion. There's a blocking of the emotion. There's like some part of me is protecting something. And that's the problem. It's like, why do I feel like I need to be so protected? And that part was confusing to me. And I think I would get like really numb to my experience, or I would just check out. And this is where I started to learn about like childhood attachment, and kind of understand that my behaviors were very much based on my relationship to my parents, and in particular my mother, because I would always come up with female figures, not necessarily male figures. So through the understanding of my childhood, and my parents were always working when I was younger, and my brother had cancer growing up, and so a lot of attention was on my brother for the first few years of my life. And that sent my mom into a deep depression. And when you psychologically, or when you scientifically look at it, a mother with depression, it all leads to this scenario essentially with their other child. So for me, my mother would go through like kind of almost like these huge mood swings. And as a child growing up, I was home alone a lot. I mean, I had babysitters and whatever, but my parents worked a lot because we didn't have that much money. So they were working constantly. And a lot of times I would start to learn how to entertain myself by myself. And that became a strength of mine, that I could be happy and content when I'm alone. But when my parents would come home, they'd be stressed out, depressed from, all the hard work and everything that was going on in life. And, on top of having, the feeling of instability with my brother having cancer. Anyway, I didn't know if my mother would be coming home happy to see me, or would be in a raging, yelling match about, the mess that I made that day, or, like whatever it was taken out on me because she was upset with the relationship between my dad and her, or she was unable to, tap into her own emotional sadness that she was feeling and just expressed it in anger. And so how that translates to the present is that I find contentment in being by myself, and nobody, as long as nobody's around, nobody disturbs that quiet easefulness of being alone. Right. But when someone steps into that, then I don't know if it's going to be a good moment, or I'm going to get yelled at, or if if my peace is going to be disturbed. And now suddenly I go numb because I just like, don't get in the way of this, my bliss, my bliss with a lowercase b. But that is now, from an intellectual perspective, I understand that happens to me, that I'm confused, that when a female figure comes home and steps in my presence, I'm confused. Am I in trouble? And also I'm already fine as I am. Why did you step into this? Right. So that's what happens psychologically. And it's not a choice. I'm not like choosing to think that. That's just a pattern where I'm sure, I'm not a scientist, but I'm sure neurochemically things are getting fired in my system that are making me respond in that way. And from a yogic perspective, I know this is kind of a little bit more on the yoga perspective. This would be my samskaras are being poked. That's the grooves or the patterns of the mind, right? And they are awakened. And in that moment, a groove or a pattern has power, like the groove of a river has power. And that river is very hard to redirect. It's not just like a rushing river. You could be like, no, turn right now. No, it goes in the same groove that it's always gone. So if you want to change that path of the river, you got to do a lot of work, a tremendous amount of work. So yes, it can be done in the present, but you start digging that ditch right now and you think like, okay, I'm going to start digging this ditch right now when I want it to change. It's not changing in that moment. You have to do a tremendous amount of work constantly to reroute the river. Now, the good news is, like, when you are aware of the samskara and that it's there, that presence can take over in such a way, in my personal experience, that it's almost like you can disperse the river into a puddle in some magical way, but it doesn't happen every time. You just have to always know that it's going to keep going that direction until, of course, over and over and over and over and over again, you choose a different path. And then that river starts to run a different direction, or we can say our behaviors.
Do you did your therapist give you a tool, like, to have a little conversation with your younger self? Like, hey, this is not my mom coming home, this is my wife coming home? Or is there a practice that you do? Is there a meditation that you do to change that? What does that look like in reality?
No, I don't have any specific tools like that, except for I guess what I do is I take a moment to breathe, and say, like, this is not how you actually feel. And then I just try to reflect on, how do I feel? How do I feel? And try to get myself past the point of numbness, past the point of protectiveness, and, see the person that is with me, I think that
sounds like the knowledge of it has shifted your ability to be. Is that what it is?
Sorry, you froze for a moment. What'd you say?
Oh, my bad. I was just saying, it sounds like just having that knowledge, like, did you totally forget? Like, did you not remember that part of your childhood? And then when you became conscious, you're like, oh shit, this all makes sense.
That part of my childhood just seemed like a normal childhood, like, oh, it's normal. Every kid goes through this. And so it didn't seem significant. And I think a lot of our patterns and samskaras and behaviors are based on what we just think is normal and insignificant. There were a lot of specific scenarios that I didn't recall that I had to recall, and that helped. But for sure, there was plenty of scenarios that were just ordinary in my head that I didn't realize had a big impact on how I felt and how I behave now.
So this is really interesting because a lot of the teachers I talk to, and a lot of people, I like to ask people, like, what's the deepest spiritual experience you've had, or the deepest insight you've had, the most enlightening experience you've ever had, and how has that changed you? And how are you still exactly the same, or how are psychological patterns affected or unaffected by that? Because so I don't know if you're forming an answer to this question, but maybe I'd like to hear from you. Love to hear first specifically what you can remember as the deepest insight or spiritual meditation experience you've ever had. If you could bring us there with that story, and then how that's affected you.
Yeah. I mean, it's not related to this previous conversation, but I'll tell you. So I started meditating through music. There was a book called Effortless Mastery, and Effortless Mastery talked a lot about the ego and kind of stepping into the present moment and kind of moving beyond our belief systems about ourselves. Anyway, point being is I was starting meditation practice long before yoga. And what was probably the most life-changing moment, two life-changing moments that go hand in hand. One was I had been getting to a point where I would say my ego was really incredibly unhealthy and my behaviors were really reactive. I was very argumentative. I was really stressed out. I was in my early 20s, very early 20s. And my band members, 8 guys at the time, sat me down and basically said, we don't want to be friends with you, and we don't want to be you in the band unless you make some big changes. And these were my best friends. I mean, had been practicing.
So wait, where was this? Where were you at the time?
So it was in between tours. We were at my at a practice space, which was my mom's basement. And
sorry, just for context for everyone, your band name, I mean, you guys were legit. You played with like you were like a touring band that played with some big acts, right?
Yeah, we played with a lot of like One Republic. We toured with Hanson. We toured with Lifehouse and awesome. George Clinton, the Parliament Funkadelic, the Wailers. I mean, the list goes on.
So this was like a lot of people. Early 2000s or late 90s. When was
this? Was early 2000s. The band name was Stealing Jane, and we had a great run together as an independent band. And we did a lot, and I was in charge of the social media which was, I don't know, MySpace and Friendster or whatever. And we did like, I think YouTube started a little bit as well. But I really ran our MySpace. That was like my main thing. And that's what caused a lot of the stress. Was I was like really interacting with a lot of people all day long and no longer playing music. And it was great to interact with people, and that was wonderful. But I felt like I was working really hard all day long and not having the same sort of appreciation. And then that touched on my, I don't know, stuff. Right. And then this became a snowball of like me versus everybody else in the band.
Were you drinking, smoking, drugging at all? What was your...
So I was, I kind of gave up drinking in 10th grade.
Wow.
Not that I don't not drink these days, but I spent a good, basically early on, like in 8th, 9th, 10th grade, I hit it pretty hard, and then recognized after waking up in frozen vomit a few times that I face down in the snow, that probably wasn't for me. So I quit early. I was, And I didn't start drinking, like casually drinking again, until maybe college. And then once I got to yoga, I stopped casually drinking again, and then only started casually drinking probably in my mid 30s or so. But that wasn't, I don't think, the issue by any means, substances or anything like this. The band also, we were pretty straight edge, meaning when we were either practicing or on tour, we didn't do any drugs, alcohol. That was not allowed. So it was
just you, the mild mannered yogi Matt, the lovely man that I've come to know, and you were like a total asshole to everyone.
Yeah,
you felt unappreciated, so much so that they're kicking you out of the band.
Yeah, it was not just the underappreciation. It was a whole bunch of things. There was this real strong need for me to feel right about everything. That was like the main point of argumentation. Yeah, ego. I also, at the same time, I was getting a tremendous amount of attention from the people that I was also giving attention to, and that created a dynamic where everybody was coming and around me, and I'm not the lead singer. So it was kind of weird. I was a guitar player. Right. So, it was creating such a weird dynamic, but that really wasn't, it was all just pieces of the puzzle. It was really like my behavior and my, teenage years are all coming to a head at my early 20s. It was like, everything that was, my parents were getting, or just got divorced, a few years prior, that probably didn't really process at that time. There's like a lot going on. So essentially I just became the worst version of myself, and they sat me down and were like, you got to change. And that, the point of this story really is that was the worst moment, when basically your closest, best friends say, we don't like you anymore. What do you do? Find your new friends? That was my first thing. Was like, well, screw you guys. I'm going to find new friends, And the next day I realized, as I was driving, well, if I find new friends, a new band, and I'm the same person, won't this happen again? And that realization was super important. I think that was the first probably, incident of like this idea that there's knowledge beyond our own intellect, kind of coming through, because I think intellectually I wouldn't have understood that, at that time. But something beyond me understood that and spoke to me. It was like, you're just going to be in the same scenario again. So I realized I had to make a change. So that began the process of self-inquiry, self-reflection. Before I knew what self-inquiry was, it was just asking myself questions. Why do I want to behave like that? Why do I want to argue? And then I asked myself, well, do I need to make this point, or can I listen to somebody else's opinion? And so I would kind of argue in my head for a while, I would try to argue the opposite opinion, because I needed to be argumentative at that time still. So it was like fire against fire. And then I would kind of see what that would do is provide me with two perspectives, my original perspective and then the opposite perspective. And that helped my ego, because now I was both right. I was right on both parts, and the ego needs to be right. So it's like, I'm correct in my belief, and I'm also correct because I can prove the other person's belief to be right. It's like, so it's so trippy, but it was a good start. It needed to happen. I needed to be correct. So I had to start there. And then essentially that turned into empathy, eventually being able to see someone else's perspective, seeing someone else's side. And that turned into also softening my own viewpoint of the world, and being able to perhaps, look at myself more from not my own personal viewpoint, but just to see me as I am. And that led me to the biggest moment. So all this self-inquiry and all this process of introspection was what led me to this moment of, I was at a wake for a producer. We had this producer of our band, and he passed, unfortunately, at a young age. And I always liked this guy because he was always barefoot. He always only ate vegetables. He was like this strange character. It was like, I always thought he was weird. And at the same time, I was attracted, again, that word attracted, I was attracted to his authenticity, just who he was, unapologetically who he was. And there was something so, I wanted that for me. And I would try to impress him, and that wouldn't work, just to get his approval, that, he just was doing what he did, So what happened eventually was when he passed, I went to his wake, and everybody, or his memorial, and everybody was barefoot, which was so cool. Everyone showed up barefoot in honor of him, and people were up on the stage singing songs. And then eventually they go up and they have like these singing bowls, and they're all oming. And I can feel the judgment inside of me coming in, being like, what a bunch of weirdos. Why are they going om on stage and whispering Brian? You know, I thought it was so strange. And that key moment, I recognized my judgment, and I saw it for judgment. And I realized, hey, like, these people are his closest friends, and you looked up to him so much. Maybe there's something here for you.
Right. And maybe you should shut up.
Yeah. Maybe it's me that is the weirdo, you know, like maybe I'm the problem here. You know, that was kind of like, and that became, so what happened in that moment was like unexplainable. And it's always strange to explain this to people that, you know, aren't in that moment with me, right? To anybody. So explaining this is always strange. But if you're more of an esoteric person, you'll be okay with this. But if you're more of a linear thinker, it's gonna be like, yeah, that didn't happen. But for me, what happened was suddenly when I had that self-reflection, everything in life, every color of the trees, the grass, the sky turned vivid, like HD. Like, I mean, super HD, you know, like when they first came out with those Samsung phones and all the colors were like super bright. You know, I was like, why is everything super bright? That's how life was. It was like Technicolor. And then every sound became massive. So I heard somebody like probably 15 feet away from me shift their weight from the left foot to the right. Like I could hear that. And then every bird, everything was just awake and alive. And I was like, I just was beside myself because I felt truly alive for the first time in my life, where I was experiencing myself as a part of nature and part of all things. And that moment was incredibly beautiful, scary, and eye-opening, and all the things. It was like, this is so amazing what is happening. And for the next 2 weeks, everything was like that. I saw a leaf and I felt like connected emotionally to that leaf, you know, like it was part of me. And I remember seeing a bird overhead and just feeling like this bird is me. So like it lasted 2 weeks of just this vividness. And that let me know that there was more to life than my limited knowledge perspective of how, you know, my viewpoint. And that set me on a course towards yoga, essentially.
Wow. So was it when you, in that moment, when they were chanting Om, and you had that thought, and then you kind of let it go because you realized it was just a thought, and you were opening yourself to what was being present. Was it the sound of the Om that did it? Was it literally just when you said like, just stay away for a little bit, when you kind of told the ego to back off, was that what opened it up, or was it the combination of the two? Do you remember?
I think from a psychology standpoint, it was the willingness to be open to what's there for me. That from a psychology standpoint. From a spiritual standpoint, I think it was, in my personal opinion, it was Brian recognizing that I had, in this moment, said, teach me. And Brian was like, I'm here for you. This is the moment. This is where the teaching begins. And, you know,
that was like his little gift to you.
I'll say this with, and then Brian became my mentor. This person who was dead became my mentor for the next couple of years and guided me on my path to yoga and answered all my questions that I always had. I would ask him questions. He would respond with clear English. Anyway, I know that's weird for a lot of people, but that's how I transitioned from, being this young adult into becoming a practicing yogi, because he led me to practicing yoga. And eventually yoga led me to human mentors and people that can answer my questions, and led me to my own internal guidance system, and realizing that eventually I didn't necessarily need Brian anymore, because I had the tools that I needed. You know, he led me to where I needed to be. And then in turn, I could do that for others.
Wow. Do you still hear from Brian every now and then, or any
I
connection?
don't know. And
what was that like when you were afterwards? Did you just kind of keep talking to Brian in your mind? Like, how did that happen?
No, I recognized there was kind of this crossover from, you know, I needed him for a period of time to get to a point where I could trust in myself and find the answers within me. And I needed, and also until I could find the teachers that in real life, or the next teachers along the path. One of which was my teacher, Rudrani. And she, there was nothing that I could ask Brian that Rudrani didn't have for me. And that kind of having somebody to ask those questions to in real life. And well, I don't want to say it's in real life, because it was real life for me regardless, but a human that had other tools for me. And I think more to offer that was different. You know, it's like eventually, just like your regular teachers, you just move on. And I don't think I needed to necessarily, there was a point in which I realized, like, wow, I haven't talked to Brian in a while. And, you know, I kind of had this moment of realizing that's because I haven't needed to, you know, like I've moved past that teaching, and now I'm moved on to new teachings.
It just kind of shows the effect that everyday people can have, you know, like,
yeah.
You know, someone like Brian, people who are being authentically themselves, like the effect you can have is more than you can maybe ever imagine.
Yeah, exactly.
So you went from being a musician and then you got into meditation before yoga.
Yeah.
And what kind of meditation were you practicing?
Just, that was the problem. I was practicing kind of unguided meditation, trying to still my mind and focus on, a single point out, like something out in the ocean, or any tips that I got from the book or from my dad, but it really wasn't guided. And that was the struggle. And so that actually is what led me to the practice of yoga. So I had met a girl on the beach one day, and I thought she was going to, I was praying for the love of my life to come along. So I thought she was going to be the love of my life. Turns out she's just was one of my best friends that is now my best friend and always has been since that moment that we met. But essentially, in speaking to her just for a brief moment, when I first met her, she could... I don't know, we must have gotten real deep real quick, but she just immediately was like, get this book. It's called Wisdom of the Peaceful Warrior. And she was like, read it. And when you're done with it, let me know. Like, we just met. And she was like, read this book, read it. And when you're done, let me know. So of course I was like, well, I wanted to see the girl again because I just met her, and just like, threw my world through a loop for the first second. I was like, what the heck? Anyway, so I got this book, and within the first few pages, it said, if you're struggling with seated meditation, try yoga, tai chi, or aikido. And my stepmom's a yoga teacher. So I was like, well, that's an easy one. I'll ask her if I could come to her class. So long story short, I went to a class of hers the next day. By Warrior 2, I was full force in love with yoga. And it took me a long time to finish that book because I was so heavily invested in yoga, or like from the get-go. I mean, I practiced every day at any class. Like, I found whatever classes I could. So the book was slow going, but the practice of yoga just took over my life.
Wow. So you really dove headfirst into yoga. Did you find yourself ever chasing or trying to get back to that experience of unity consciousness you had at Brian's funeral? Or did you ever, through yoga, have that level of connection to all beings? And again, and is that something you think about still?
It's a good question. I would have to kind of reflect upon. I think I was so caught up in loving the practice and loving how I felt that I don't know that I was chasing anything. I felt like I had my connection to more than just my current experience beyond that, like if you want to call it samadhi. I don't know that I think kind of it was more ever present samadhi, rather than like the, when you get into the yoga and everything feels still and you're in, in your asana, in your meditation practice, but more like a kind of a constant awareness that was in existence for me. And I don't know that I ever practice meditation with that same kind of, I think a lot of people chase that experience of samadhi in their meditation practice. I don't think that I ever really had that, the way that people kind of chase handstand or, this king dancer pose. There's this feeling like, oh, there's a peak and I got to get to it. I certainly have had that in my asana practice plenty of times, but in meditation, I think I had such good guidance that I don't think I had any falsehoods that there was like some magical place. It's already here. And I can tap into it at any moment in time. And that is the magic, just being alive, just being in my human form and with all of my nonsense. That is the experience of oneness. It's just recognizing that this life is a gift and it's beautiful as it is. I don't have to, my mind doesn't have to be still in order to experience that beauty. You know what I mean? I could be complete chaos and whatnot, but still be in the recognition of gratitude of like, man, this is amazing to experience this, because that means I'm human, I'm alive.
Yeah, Dharma Mitra used to say it's like the backup light. Once you have this experience of, I don't know whether we could talk about samadhis and whatnot, but once you've had this, at a certain point, you have a conscious experience of unity. And I guess I'll ask you this, do you feel now, because of that moment, that you have maybe less fear, like that you can live life in less fear, that there's, like when push comes to shove, are you okay to die? Like, do you ever have those kind of thoughts? Like, do you think?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, I fear suffering, not death. I fear suffering. So like, death to me would be just, coming back into this universal consciousness, the flow of energy. It's just part of life. The suffering aspect while being human, I think that might be the biggest challenge. And I don't know that I'm above that, but let me say this. Yeah. I am not above that. that fear is real. And I think what I fear more than death is just the fact, it's not really fear. It's just, I would be like, the thought of dying just makes me sad because I love living, not because, I got to hang on to life, but I just really got to a place where, and still am in a place, with all gratitude. And when I say this, that I just really love life. And so I would be sad to know if tomorrow was the end, because I would be like, man, I really, really enjoy this. It's not that I don't feel like I have any regrets, or I don't feel like, oh man, I wish I only did this. I don't have like this bucket list thing. I feel like I've really lived life fully, and therefore I would miss it. If I could miss it, I don't know.
Yeah. Do you believe in reincarnation at all?
No, I mean, I don't believe like you're going to come back as a human being. That's a belief. Take it for what it's worth. I believe that reincarnation, the way I would say it, is everything is already incarnated and continues to be incarnated. So, it's like there's no end and then beginning again. It's just continuing. So it's, it's feeding into the next, a dying tree feeds into life of the next tree and the next organism, or the next, it's just all part of the process. So do I think I come back as like, someone with consciousness specifically? No, but I think as a human being, will just be absorbed into the constant flow of life that is current.
But so then, was Brian's like soul connecting with you after he died, or was that just your psychological internalization of what Brian meant to you in life?
Yeah, to be honest, I've contemplated those questions, but I also realized that I'll never know the answer, and I'm also okay with that. If there is, heaven, or if there is reincarnation. I'm cool with all of that. If any of that stuff is true, but also I don't need to know, because that's a waste of my time. What I need to do now is enjoy what I do have, recognizing that that's the next transition. I don't have to spend my time kind of thinking about that. If it's helping me right now, great. I'm not saying anybody else shouldn't contemplate life after death or death. I've done a lot of contemplation on death. But at the same time, I think the reason why we contemplate those things is in hopes that we can live life more fully now,
Who would you say inspires you now as a teacher? Who are your teachers now? And what are the lessons that you're working on for yourself?
Oh man. I mean, I have a lot of teachers in life. But if we're going to be if we pull it back to the more everyday superficial, I got a vocal teacher. And while that seems like, probably small beans compared to what we were just talking about, it's not. It's still a process of being a student and allowing myself to be part of the process that could be, ups and downs of frustrations and feeling like, why can't I? Can I? How can I? And having the guidance of somebody that
what
believes
kind of
in
teacher?
you. A vocal teacher, voice.
Vocal.
For singing.
Voice.
Yeah.
Oh, but then you said die. You said, I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you said a minute ago.
What did I say? Basically I was saying, having a teacher that supports me and guides me, maybe.
Guides. I thought you said dies. I was like, what?
No. Supports and guides me in a way that, into like kind of unknown territories of my potential. And that requires humility, that too, actually.
Yeah.
Humility on my end, and the, willingness to, be in the seat of the student in that way. And the mystery that is the path, kind of, I think that one of the hardest parts of being a student is the mystery of wanting to get to the end, wanting to get to a point where you're like, now I've got it. And being a student is constantly sitting in the, I don't know. And that's difficult. So I think that for me is a great place to be in having, and I try to put myself in that in many ways. Currently it's in my voice.
Cool. And how about in the yoga and meditation realm? Are there any, or in the self-help realm in general, are there any voices out there that you're kind of consuming on social media, or people that you're really interested in right now that you kind of look up to, or at least enjoy their teaching, not necessarily looking up to them personally?
I mean, honestly, a lot of my colleagues that I see on the yoga circuit, and I'm not, I think anybody, I'm not looking at one particular person, but, anybody that, if I'm going to say, one person I can throw out there would be like Alan Finger. I love his book, Tantra of the Yoga Sutras. And
I have that back here.
It's the yellow one, right? Yeah, the yellow book. That's perhaps that is my favorite translation of the Yoga Sutras to date. I've read a bunch of them, and that has provided the relief, I would say, in me to finally say like, wow, okay, this perspective is what I have been, his words are what I've been seeking and wanting to share and trying to, but didn't have that sort of, I didn't have the validation within myself to have the courage to speak in that way, because all the other translations sounded kind of opposite, And so his translation gave me permission to really step into teaching philosophy from my personal experience, and because it aligns. I also really like Tantra Illuminated, Christopher D. Wallace. I think his writings, though they're incredibly nerdy and very academic-like, I really love the teachings that he provides in Tantra Illuminated. But really, it's...
I get him next year.
Yeah, he's great. But coming back to my original, like, it doesn't have to be for me anymore, this like one teacher, but I think it's really important to have the one teacher in multiple things in life, whether it's your asana practice or your meditation practice or your pranayama, and you stick with one teacher for a long enough time that you really absorb their methodology and their expertise, and you become that expert in that kind of study, and then you find the next one, and so on and so forth. But like within all things, and I don't think we should always just kind of dabble, like I'm saying, but at the same time, right now, my honest answer to you is like, I'm just taking from a wide variety of people. But I also love diving into, when I find that one, I love diving into their perspective and their teachings, and really going hard.
You have 20 plus years of studentship under your belt in various things. I think that qualifies someone to kind of dabble a little bit. You become, it's like, I forget his name. He was a chess champion, and then later he became a judo champion and a push hands champion. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I know what you're talking about. I don't know the name. Sorry.
I think the book was Searching for Bobby Fischer. He was like a child prodigy that Bobby Fischer played against. Anyway, that guy, he talks about how if you learn to master one thing, then you've learned the skill of what it takes to master something. And then you can master other things more easily. And then at a certain point, you're able to integrate very quickly the kind of essence of different, teachings. And then maybe around the way you find something that you need to dive in deeper on. And you can work with that.
That's
sounds like that's where you're at.
Yeah. And that's what I created. Like Chromatic Yoga is based around that exact philosophy of mastery, understanding if you, it's like the development of how to learn and how to master something. If you apply those tools to yoga, then you could apply it to anything in life. So whether it's asana or meditation, it's the same skill set, and you can, or if it's, meditation or asana and relationships and or your business dynamic with your colleagues, it's all the same process. And that's kind of where I pulled Chromatic Yoga and created around that.
Do you want to illuminate that process a little bit? What's the process of Chromatic Yoga? Is it something that could be shared in a
concise way? So Chromatic Yoga is based on this idea of the chromatic scale, which is usually in music, you have a 7-tone scale, which wide gaps between each note that makes things sound pleasant and easeful to the ear. And chromatic scale is half steps, small steps between notes. It contains the full totality of 12 tones. And usually you don't create music from 12 tones unless you're a jazz player or if you're a classical composer or something like this, because it's complicated and it's hard. But the adapting this concept of small steps is where the word chromatic yoga fits in. So chromatic is the small steps or identifying the small steps to a larger whole. So when you have a big goal, it could be, let's say, not a big goal. Let's go to a small microcosm goal of like, I want to achieve handstand. Well, handstand might seem to somebody like a big task. Well, I'm not just gonna be able to get to handstand. Well, that's true. You probably won't be able to do handstand unless you have the steps that make up a handstand. But if you don't have the steps that make up a handstand, you can break it down into small pieces. And when it seems like, if it still seems overwhelming, each piece seems overwhelming, then they're not small enough. So you got to break them down so that every step feels achievable enough. And then of course you have to take the steps. It's not just breaking it down, but breaking down the steps into achievable small bite-sized pieces that make up, if you master each piece, every small step, if you master that step, then you never forget that step. Meaning if you're going to master an element of handstand, let's make it just literal, you have to master the hand grip on the ground, which means you have to strengthen the flexors of the wrist and the coordination between the flexors and the extensors of your wrist and all the different muscles that attach to your fingers, the lumbricals, for example, and how they interact with one another. And then it's not just that, but it's how it coordinates with the rest of your body. So you start with just like, can I grip my index finger into the ground in such a way that's going to activate my flexor indicis muscle, which whatever, you don't need to know those terms, but how do I get the muscles engaged in such a way that's going to be accessible for me? And I get so good at it that I'll never forget it. Like riding a bike. If I don't ride a bike for 20 years, I probably ride it 20 years from now. So you do that with every step that makes up a handstand. Of course, you need guidance. You need a teacher. And the teacher can then, who's walked the path before, it's, in my opinion, their responsibility to break it down small enough so that their students can walk the path faster than you walk the path. So for me as a teacher, as a chromatic teacher, my goal is to make whatever took me 2 years, I want to simplify that so much into the steps that are easy to take so that they can do it in 2 months, or whatever. And if it can't take them less time, then that's on me to make smaller steps so that they can master it in a faster period of time. And that's how evolution works, right? It's like, if they can do it faster than I did, then they get better, and then they can take the next step past where I am.
I think that that's like the perfect definition, or I wouldn't say the perfect definition of a teacher, but one of the definitions of a great teacher is that they can break something down into so small parts that they can give you the exact next part you need to work on.
Yeah.
Like if you as a teacher can pinpoint the exact next part the person needs to work on, they can make progress.
And that, to me, exactly as you're saying, is what makes the difference between a teacher and a guide. So in the chromatic system, at the 200-hour level, you're called a chromatic guide because you guide people through a series of postures, a sequence that feels good, where it's just, generally speaking, what most people call yoga teaching. But a guide is somebody that says, hey, let's walk this path together. And a teacher is someone who educates and says, like, hey, when you put the right foot in front of the left, like, see if you can articulate your ankle in this way so that you get better propulsion so you can move faster and more efficiently. You know what I mean? There's a difference. Obviously, this is a silly example, but there's a difference between guiding through and saying, like, I'm just going to tell you what poses to do, and someone who tells you how to do them and the steps you can take to improve and expand.
Cool. I think that's a kind of a great way to pin this. Is there anything that you would want to share with the community, like where to find you? Obviously, Chromatic Yoga, you do Chromatic Yoga teacher trainings. What are you most excited to share? How can people find you, connect with you, work with you, besides doing the handstand, is it doing your first handstand or something? You have one of your workshops at the Berkshire Yoga Festival, is that?
Oh, cool. Yeah. So, everything you can find me on, social media. The Yogi Matt is my Instagram. And then we have a Chromatic Yoga Instagram as well, chromaticyoga.com, theyogimat.com. All of my teachings, both online, in person, and also the hybrid cross between in person and online. We do a lot of in-person events where we have online trainings that lead up to the in-person so that we make the most out of the in-person experience. All of that is available on theyogimat.com. And, we have 200-hour online trainings, 300-hour online trainings, in-person events like chromatic teacher trainings. And I do like anatomy in motion, which is a hybrid training between online 20-hour anatomy course. And you come together for 20 hours of how to apply that to your practice in person. I have the elements of mastery coming up, and that's another type of immersion where we do a postural analysis for 10 hours online, and then we get together and we learn how that applies to the elements and how the elements can enhance our practice and so on and so forth. So there's all different types of immersions and trainings at theyogimat.com.
Cool. I think you are one of the teachers that I'm really excited is going to be teaching at our festival, and I really hope people who hear this will come and try to meet you and work and study with you. Is there any final dreg of wisdom you want to leave us with?
Oh, enjoy life. That's my final. Just find a way, even if it's the life throws us big challenges and struggles. But if there's a way to enjoy the ups and the downs, then life is a gift, and it's fun to live.
Thanks, brother. You wanna play us a tune on our way out?
Yeah, let's do it.
You go for it.
All right, I can go for it.
You gonna sing a song?
Sure, why not?
You can always cut it out. Let's hear your vocal coach in action.
Great. Always working on empty. Is that the kind of way to face the burning heat? Just think about my baby. I'm so full of love I can barely eat. Nothing sweeter than my baby. I never want once from the cherry tree. my baby, sweet as can be. She give me 2 eggs just for kissing me. When my time comes around, lay me gently in the cold dark earth. No grave can hold my body down. Crawl home to earth.
Dude, nice. I thought that was an original for a second, and I'm like, wait, I've heard this before.
Yeah, that's a Hosier song. No, it's not. I wish. That's Hosier.
Hosier, right.
Yeah, I used to play that in Shavasana all the time.
You play that in Shavasana?
Yeah, or I used to.
Do you do any original music?
I do a little bit of original music, yeah, but right now it's not my focus.
Are you going to bring your guitar when you come up here?
I will, for sure.
Okay, awesome.
That's sure definitely the plan.
All right, well, checking out Dregs of Wisdom, episode 15. It's a wrap with Matt Giordano. Yogi Matt, thank you very much, my brother. And we'll call it there. Peace.
Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, if you like that, hit like and subscribe. Join us for the next Dregs.